My husband and I are both 35 now. We met in college, fell in love, and have been married for 8 years. We have a beautiful daughter who was born in 2020. My husband is a professor at a medical school, he's a doctor himself, and my friend Sarah works in the same department as him. Back in December, Sarah and I went out for lunch, and she dropped a bombshell. She told me that she suspected something was going on between my husband and one of his students, a 25-year-old woman. Sarah claimed she'd seen them exchange what she called yearning looks. She said she'd never seen my husband talk to another woman the way he talked to this girl. Sarah had known my husband for years, and she insisted that he'd always been aloof around women. But this time, it was different. At first, I laughed it off. I told Sarah she was jumping to conclusions based on nothing more than these supposed looks. But she didn't back down. She said, "That's why I didn't tell you sooner." I was confused too. It's not like he goes out of his way to talk to her, but whenever they do talk, it's like watching a slow-burn romance movie. She looks at him like he's Brad Pitt, and he looks at her the way he used to look at you. Those words stung. They cut deeper than I let on. But I kept up my facade, smiled, and told Sarah she was probably overthinking things. That night, I casually mentioned it to my husband. I was laughing, expecting him to join in and deny the absurd idea that he could be in love with a student. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me, his eyes welling up with tears, and said, "I'm sorry." My world shattered in that moment. He confessed that he couldn't get her out of his mind, that he tried, but he couldn't shake the feelings he had for her. He said he should have told me sooner, but he was hoping he could save our relationship. He wanted to, he really did. I asked him if he had cheated on me, and he said no. He assured me they hadn't even talked outside of college, and he understood how wrong it would be to pursue anything with a student. Apparently, she'd written him a letter about a year ago, confessing her love for him. He told her that even though he was into her, nothing could ever happen. That's when the yearning looks had started. I don't remember exactly how I reacted. I think I just started packing. I took our daughter and moved in with my parents. I've been living with them ever since. Half of me wanted him to come after me, to beg for forgiveness, but he never did. He visits sometimes to see our daughter, but that's it. We don't talk about what happened, and I don't bring it up either. I've been torturing myself by checking that girl's social media. She's beautiful, almost doll-like, and incredibly intelligent. I can't help but think that someone like my husband should be with someone like her. He's always been so good-looking, and I've always felt like a plain Jane. She's the Meredith to his Derek. I'm lost. I don't know what to do or who I am without him. I don't even know what to tell people. Some part of me still wants him to come back, to tell me it was all a mistake. After months of avoiding it, I've decided it's time to talk to him. I've been reading all the advice from friends and family, and I know it's time to rip the band-aid off. I'm going over to our house, and I'll see what happens. I recently met up with Sarah for dinner to talk about what she had told me. I thanked her for being such a good friend and for letting me know about my husband and the student. Naturally, I wanted to know if there had been anything else unusual about my husband's behavior. She said he's been a bit distant and withdrawn from everyone but hadn't acted out of the ordinary otherwise. Yesterday, I decided to go over to our house unannounced to confront him. He was alone in his office when I arrived. I told him we needed to talk, and he agreed, saying he'd explain everything. He told me that the student had a crush on him for 2 years. Apparently, her friends would tease her about it, and she would blush or stare at him during her rotations. At first, he didn't think much of it. He explained that many girls have had crushes on him in the past, but he's always ignored them. About a year and a half ago, they ended up in the same research group, which meant they had to spend a lot of time together. That's when he started noticing her. He confessed that he was impressed by her intelligence and beauty, and realized he had a crush on her. The moment he recognized those feelings, he dropped out of the research group. This was about a year ago. A few weeks later, she handed him a letter, confessing her feelings for him. He said his first response to her was a warning that she could get into trouble because of it. But she pressed him for an answer, asking if it was all in her head. His reply was, "It's not just in your head, but nothing can come out of it. I hope you understand." That was the last time they had any direct interaction, according to him. He claimed the yearning looks that Sarah had noticed were nothing more than awkward eye contact. He admitted that while he still finds her attractive, he has no intention of pursuing any kind of relationship with her, regardless of whether we stay together or not. He even offered to change jobs and go to therapy to make things right. I told him I needed time to think about everything, but as I reflect on it, there are a few things I can't get past. 1. This has been going on for 3 years, and he never once mentioned it to me. 2. They spent a lot of time together last year working on the research, and he allowed it to continue. 3. He told her he liked her back. 4. He's still attracted to her. For these reasons, I've decided to go ahead with the divorce. Trust has been broken, and I don't think I can rebuild it. A relationship without trust isn't something I want to stay in. I've informed my parents, they're not entirely supportive of the decision but are still standing by me. I've also contacted my lawyer. So the process is starting, though I know it'll be a long one. Second story. I've been best friends with Becca since 2010. We met in college, became roommates, and stayed close even after graduation. We lived together until 2019, when I moved in with my boyfriend, Nate. Over the years, I've always been there for Becca, especially when she struggled with her drinking problem. She's tried to stay sober, but every few years, something triggers her to start drinking again. This summer, it happened again. Last Saturday, Becca called me, drunk and stranded somewhere, asking for a ride home. I was sick with the flu, and on cold medicine, so I couldn't drive. Nate offered to go pick her up instead, and I didn't think much of it at the time. A few days later, I noticed Nate acting strangely with his phone. Normally, he leaves it out on the coffee table when we're watching TV, but suddenly, he started putting it face down, hiding his notifications. My first thought was that he was planning a surprise for me, maybe even a proposal, and I thought Becca might be in on it. Yesterday, when I saw Becca, I mentioned Nate's odd behavior, half-jokingly asking if she knew anything about a potential proposal. Instead of laughing it off, she looked troubled. Then she dropped a bombshell I wasn't prepared for. Becca told me, through tears, that she and Nate had hooked up in his car the night he came to pick her up. She claimed she was so drunk she barely knew what she was doing, and she'd been texting Nate since then, insisting he tell me the truth or she would. I was in shock and demanded to see the texts. But when she showed me her phone, all the messages had been sent through Signal, an app that deletes messages after a day. All I could see was that they had been chatting, but I couldn't read what they had said. I wasn't sure what to believe. I asked Becca if she was sure she hadn't imagined it or confused a dream with reality. At that, she completely lost it, insisting she wasn't delusional and that she wasn't making it up. She said I could choose to believe her or not, but she was telling me the truth. I left and went straight home to confront Nate. When I told him what Becca had said, he looked shocked and denied everything. He said he couldn't understand why Becca would say that. According to him, he had just given her a ride home, and they discussed how long we'd been together and that we should get married already. He admitted they had been texting on Signal afterward, but said it was only to ask her advice on engagement rings and planning a proposal. To clear things up, Nate messaged Becca, asking if she had made up the story about them hooking up to avoid spoiling the surprise of his proposal. Becca replied, saying there was no proposal and that he should stop playing dumb. Nate then called her, pretending I wasn't in the room, and tried to convince her to drop whatever she was doing. He said he'd rather ruin the surprise than destroy our relationship. But Becca kept insisting he was lying until he got angry and hung up. Now, I'm torn. Nate's furious, saying it's bad enough Becca ruined his proposal plan, but worse that I'd believe her lies and think he'd cheat on me. Becca texted me later, apologizing, but I haven't responded or talked to her since. I don't want to believe that Nate would cheat on me, or that he'd take advantage of Becca if she was that drunk. But I also can't ignore the fact that I've known Becca for 13 years, and I can't imagine she'd lie to me about something this serious. At the same time, I know she has a history of making poor decisions when she's drunk. I'm stuck, not wanting to accuse Nate of something he didn't do, but also not wanting to be blind to the truth. I told Nate I had figured out how to recover deleted messages from Signal. He didn't flinch. Instead, he immediately pulled out his phone, opened the app, and asked me to show him how to do it. At that moment, I felt a wave of relief. If he was willing to hand over his phone without hesitation, it must mean he was telling the truth. But when I tried to download Signal on my old phone, it turned out that the device was too outdated to support the current version of the app. My plan to recover the messages failed. Nate then asked me if I really needed to buy a new phone just to believe him, adding that he was willing to do it if that's what it would take. I told him it wasn't that I didn't believe him, I just wanted proof because I couldn't understand why Becca would lie about something so serious. Nate, clearly frustrated, said that Becca was a crazy drunk, and there was no way to understand her actions. He then insisted that once we proved nothing happened, he didn't want me talking to her again. He even urged me to get up because we needed to get to the Verizon store before it closed. By then, I was convinced he was telling the truth. I told Nate we didn't need to go anywhere and that I believed him. I knew he didn't cheat on me and would never do that. Nate responded by saying he hoped I knew that and was hurt that I hadn't taken his word for it from the beginning. I tried to explain why I hadn't dismissed Becca's story right away, but Nate said he couldn't listen to it right now. I agreed that I would cut Becca off, but I wanted to confront her one last time to try and get her to admit that nothing happened. Nate agreed but said to call her with my phone on speaker so he could hear her admit she was lying. I called Becca and told her the same thing I told Nate, that I had figured out how to recover deleted messages on Signal. Her response was immediate. She asked me why I would need to do that, which made it clear to me that she had been lying all along. I told her I wanted proof of what she and Nate had talked about. Becca asked if I had already seen the messages, and I lied, saying yes. She went silent for a long time, and when I finally asked if she had anything to say, she asked if that meant Nate and I were engaged now. That's when I lost it. I screamed at her, demanding to know what the hell was wrong with her and how she could even think that was all she had to say. Becca started yelling back, telling me to calm down and accusing me of never believing her anyway since Nate and I hadn't broken up. By then, I was crying too hard to respond, so Nate took the phone and told Becca to go fuck herself and never contact either of us again. Then he hung up. A minute later, Becca sent me a completely unhinged text, and I'm quoting it verbatim here, minus the names. Courtney, you are supposed to be my friend for life. You are supposed to be there for me. You are supposed to be my person. But then you meet Nate and now you only care about Nate. Everything is about Nate. Tell me why Nate comes to pick me up when I call you? I called you, not your precious fucking Nate. I only want you to see how fucked up this is, but do you? No. Of course you don't. Of course you choose Nate over me like you always do and like you always will. You pretend to care about me, but I can see you don't care. It is pathetic, Courtney. You are a pathetic woman who would choose a man over a friend. But since you can't say it yourself, I will. Since you have to have your sweet perfect little baby Nate do it for you, I will. Goodbye, Courtney. Is that what you want? Goodbye forever. I hope you fucking got what you fucking want. There were the 3 dots at the end, showing she was still typing, but I blocked her before she could send anything else. I didn't care what more she had to say. I knew it would just be more nonsense, trying to blame me or justify her actions, and I wasn't going to give her the chance. I know Nate is probably right, there's no logical reason for Becca to do something like this, and trying to figure it out is a waste of time. But I can't help thinking about it. My best guess is that Becca somehow blames Nate and me for her problems. Maybe she believed that if she claimed she hooked up with Nate, I'd break up with him, stay her friend, and somehow fix everything in her life. I asked Nate if he could forgive me for doubting him, and he said that since I realized the truth and cut Becca off, we could try to move forward together. I don't think he'll propose anytime soon, though. If I were him, I wouldn't. From what Nate said, he hadn't actually done much planning beyond asking Becca about rings and whether I'd find a public proposal tacky. Based on that, I doubt it will happen soon, if at all. After I blocked Becca, she didn't just fade away like I'd hoped. She created multiple fake accounts and started sending me unhinged messages, accusing me of destroying her life. She also threatened to get revenge on both me and Nate. This harassment went on for months, with her sending dozens of messages a day. It didn't stop there. Our mutual friends told me she was posting daily rants on Facebook, blaming me for all her problems and expressing her hatred. I was terrified. I even went to the police twice, desperate for a restraining order because I was scared she might show up at our apartment and attack us. I installed a front door camera because the fear of her doing something violent felt too real. But when I spoke to the police, they dismissed my concerns. Because Becca wasn't making direct threats of violence, they said she was just a nuisance. They made me feel like I was overreacting, pointing out that it wasn't illegal to talk trash on Facebook. Their advice? Just keep blocking her accounts, and eventually, she'd get bored and move on. Things escalated when someone broke the windshield of Nate's car while it was parked at his work. Other cars in the lot were also vandalized, so it could have been a random act, but I was convinced it was Becca. I went to the police again, and this time, they actually sent an officer to talk to her. Becca denied touching Nate's car, and I had no proof to say otherwise. But during their visit, the police found her apartment in a terrible state, filthy, and with Becca apparently drunk out of her mind 24/7. They deemed her a danger to herself and had her placed in a psych ward for a week. Since Becca left the psych ward, I haven't heard a word from her. I don't know if she was diagnosed with something, if she's on medication now, or if she just finally moved on. I do know that she moved in with her dad, who thankfully lives in a different state. Every so often, I check her social media to make sure she's not posting about me again and to confirm that she's staying far away. As for Nate, I haven't mentioned him much because we're no longer together. He broke up with me after the windshield incident. He couldn't handle the constant harassment from Becca, and he probably never fully forgave me for not believing him right away. It hurt, but I can't really blame him. I tried reaching out to him after Becca was out of the picture, hoping we could fix things, but he just wasn't interested. Third story. I'd been with my wife for 4 years now, and together we're raising my 5-year-old daughter, Leah. Leah is from a previous relationship that ended shortly after she was born. Her mother, my ex, didn't want much to do with either of us, no custody, no visitation, just occasional drama. But Leah has bonded deeply with my wife. To her, my wife is her mother in every way that counts. They are inseparable, and seeing them together has always made me happy. Now, my wife is 8 months pregnant, and something's changed. She shut me out of the pregnancy almost entirely, yet she refuses to admit that anything's wrong. It's like I'm on the outside looking in, and it's been eating away at me. When we first found out she was pregnant, it was early morning, and I was making breakfast. She came up behind me and told me. I was over the moon, but since it wasn't planned, I asked how she felt about it. She smiled through tears, telling me she was excited. I was thrilled, picked her up, kissed her all over, and reassured her she would be an amazing mother. Things felt right between us then, but that feeling didn't last. She made a big deal of announcing the pregnancy to everyone else. There were balloons, custom t-shirts, mugs that said "Best Big Sister" for Leah. But with me? Nothing like that. When her sister asked how I liked my announcement box, my wife casually replied, "He didn't get one. It's not his first rodeo." That stung, but I brushed it off, assuming she just didn't want to make a big fuss with me since I already had a child. It became difficult to attend any of her ultrasound appointments. She would tell me not to miss work, or that Leah's routine shouldn't be interrupted, giving me excuse after excuse. Finally, I managed to go to one of the big appointments, the one where we'd hear the baby's heartbeat. When the sound came through the monitor, my wife was overwhelmed with happy tears, and the tech commented on how strong and precious it was. I got emotional too and cleared my throat, trying to keep it together. The tech smiled at me and said, "Isn't that sound beautiful, Dad?" And then my wife, without hesitation, said, "This isn't his first child. It's not that special for him." I was stunned. I immediately corrected her, telling her this was one of the most important moments of my life. It was awkward after that, and I could feel the distance between us growing even more. Another time, I overheard my wife, her mom, and Leah laughing in the living room while I was cooking dinner. Leah was giggling about how cute it was that the baby was moving, and my wife had let both Leah and her mom feel the baby kick before I even had a chance. It hurt, but I kept my feelings in check and told them I was happy for them. Later that night, when my wife was poking at her belly and laughing, I asked if I could feel too. She brushed me off, saying, "You've already felt Leah move when she was a baby. What could be better than that?" Leah was the cutest baby ever. It felt like she was deliberately excluding me, like I wasn't even part of this pregnancy. She hasn't felt well throughout the pregnancy, nausea, cramps, dizziness, but she won't let me help. When I bring her food or something to drink, she'll offer it to Leah instead. If I try to rub her feet, she'll ask me to go play with Leah so she doesn't feel neglected. It's as if every effort I make to be there for her gets redirected to Leah. I'm not ignoring my daughter by any means, I'm an active parent, but I feel like my wife is shutting me out of this experience and pushing me away emotionally. One weekend, we took Leah to the zoo. My wife wasn't feeling great, and her symptoms worsened as we walked around. She got cramps, felt nauseous, and at one point, she could barely stand. I carried her to a bench and told her I was going to call an ambulance or drive her to the hospital myself. She refused, crying that she didn't want to ruin Leah's trip because we hadn't made it to the aviary, which is Leah's favorite part. I insisted we leave for the hospital, but she kept telling me to go on with Leah and leave her there. Then, out of nowhere, her dad showed up. She hadn't even told me she called him. He helped her to the car, and they went to the doctor. I was shocked, but I grabbed Leah and followed them. Leah was upset about missing the aviary, pouting in the back seat. By that point, I didn't care about Leah's disappointment, I was focused on my wife and unborn child's health. When we got to the hospital, my wife was furious with me for making Leah miss out on her favorite part of the zoo. I don't know what's going on with my wife. She's clearly distant, pushing me away at every turn, yet refuses to admit that anything is wrong. I feel isolated from this pregnancy and from her. It's breaking my heart because all I want is to be there for her, to share in the experience of bringing our child into the world. But right now, it feels like she's keeping me at arm's length and there's nothing I can do to change it. Another example, we were sitting in the stands one afternoon, watching Leah play in a local kids' sport. I turned to my wife, trying to share a quiet moment between us. Do you think our kid will be athletic? Artistic? Maybe into science or math? I asked, hoping to talk about the future. About the child we were about to welcome into the world. But she immediately shut it down. This is Leah's moment, she said flatly. We shouldn't make it about someone who isn't even here. It hurt. Leah was out on the field playing, completely absorbed in her game. We had already waved to her, cheered her on, and even held up a sign. I wasn't trying to take anything away from Leah. I just wanted to talk about our baby, about our future. But once again, I was left feeling like this pregnancy wasn't something I was allowed to be a part of. As her pregnancy progressed, her bump became more and more noticeable. To everyone else, she was proud to show it off. She'd happily ask her family, friends, and siblings if they wanted to see her bump. I'm huge. I can't believe there's only a few weeks left, she'd say with excitement. People would touch her belly, talk to the baby, take photos. Her parents would even tell stories from when she was little or read to her bump. When they went to the beach, her friends would flood social media with pictures of her. So ready to be an honorary auntie. One friend wrote. Her sister posted, she puts the B in bump and beautiful. But when we went out together, it was different. She'd wear the loosest clothes she could find, covering her bump. I'd notice her pull her shirt down whenever I walked into the room, as if she didn't want me to see. It was like she was hiding the pregnancy from me, but showing it to the rest of the world. One day, she was being playful and sat on my lap in bed. Her bump was right in my face, and I took the chance to finally feel it. I ran my hands over her belly and told her, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. You're already a great mom to Leah, and I can't wait to see you as our family grows." I rested my hand on her belly, taking in the moment. "I love you so much already," I said to our baby. "I'm so excited to meet you. I hope you have your mom's eyes." She immediately shifted off me, her mood changing in an instant. "I know your ex had a bigger bump than me. I bet it was fun seeing Leah move all the time," she said coldly. "You don't have to act like you care. I know you've done this before." I was taken aback, trying to tell her that I wasn't thinking about it like that at all. Leah was special, but this was something entirely new, something different and special in its own right. But before I could finish, she left the room. I saw her shoulders shaking as she walked away, tears silently falling. I don't think she's cheating. I know she's not. But I just can't understand why she's keeping me at such a distance, why she doesn't want me to be happy or involved in this pregnancy. Everything else in our relationship feels completely normal as long as I don't bring up the baby. She's affectionate, she initiates intimacy, she brags about how good of a husband I am, how well I've handled the pregnancy. We plan for the future, we have date nights, we laugh together, everything is perfect except when the baby is involved. Then came the day everything fell apart. I had some time between clients at work and decided to surprise her. I went to a local baby store and bought a bunch of items from her Pinterest board, things she had been planning for the baby in nursery. I came home with flowers, a certificate for a prenatal massage, her favorite food, and the baby items. She seemed grateful at first, and I left feeling like I had done something right. But when I got back home later that day, everything was gone. She had returned it all to buy things for Leah instead. She told me she didn't want Leah to feel left out. That was the moment I snapped. I broke down in a way I never had before. I cried, and for the first time in our marriage, I yelled. I told her that having a child with her was the worst mistake I'd ever made, that even my deadbeat ex at least let me bond with my unborn child. I told her I didn't care about the baby because she wouldn't let me care. I said I hoped she was as miserable as she had made me, and that she should prepare for a custody battle because I wasn't going to let her take my child from me. She looked at me calmly and said, "I know you don't care about the baby, but I'll die before you take my baby from me." I was stunned. I'd been begging her to let me interact with our baby, to let me be a part of this experience. I asked if her therapist had any insight, but she insisted that nothing was wrong, that she wasn't doing anything unusual. "You've done this before," she said, "so it shouldn't matter." In a moment of anger and hurt, I even asked if the baby was mine. "I know it is," but I was lashing out. She threw her phone at me and said she'd do whatever I needed, paternity test, whatever it took. But at that point, I realized I wasn't helping. I called her parents to come to the house while I left for a hotel. I didn't want to stress her or the baby any further, but I didn't know what else to do. Now, I'm staying at an Airbnb, trying to figure out how to move forward. I miss her so much, but I don't know why she's behaving this way. I've apologized for the things I said, but I can't take them back. I'm terrified about what will happen when our baby is born. Will she even let me be a part of our child's life? I spoke to a mutual friend who told me she's distraught and doesn't want to be a single mom. She says she loves me, but her actions make me feel the opposite, even when I beg her to change. I just don't know what to do anymore. When I called my father-in-law, I was at a loss. He and my wife have always been close, and I knew he had a good handle on family dynamics. His marriage seemed solid, and he had maintained strong relationships with everyone in the family. I didn't give him many details about what was going on between me and my wife, but since I was staying at an Airbnb, it was no secret that things weren't going well at home. His advice to me was simple but hard to hear. What do you have to lose by confronting her? He asked. You're already staying in a separate house from your pregnant wife, worrying about a possible divorce. So what do you have to lose? He told me to be a man, go home, and lay it all on the line. So, I took his advice. I let him and my mother-in-law take Leah for a night, and the next day, I showed up at my house with flowers and groceries, determined to have a serious conversation. When I walked in, my wife asked what I was doing there. I told her simply, I live here, and I want to talk. I apologized for everything I'd said and done, the hurtful words and the frustrations I had taken out on her. I poured my heart out, but when I finished, she just sat there, quiet. I told her it was her turn to talk, but she kept insisting that everything was fine, that nothing was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her my heart was broken, that we had been through so much together, fought for each other through difficult times, and now she was lying to my face. It was devastating to see her in denial. She started to cry, and for about 30 minutes, we just sat there in silence, her tears filling the room with all the words she wasn't saying. Finally, she admitted something that caught me off guard. She said she had been afraid that if she was honest with me, our relationship would end. When she finally opened up, I was floored. She admitted that the fact that this was her first child but not mine had weighed on her heavily. She hadn't expected it to bother her until she became pregnant, and then it hit her hard. She said she often lay awake at night, wondering if my ex had stayed with me, whether we'd still be a family with Leah, and whether she would even matter to me in that scenario. It turned out that her insecurities had been festering since the beginning of the pregnancy. She told a close friend once that she couldn't wait to have a baby with her soulmate. But instead of being supportive, her friend replied that soulmates didn't come with baby mamas or kids from previous relationships. That comment shattered her confidence. She started to see herself and our unborn child as my sloppy seconds, feeling like no one dreams of having children by multiple different people. She worried that she was just a substitute because the family I had originally wanted hadn't worked out. She confessed that she had found old pictures of my ex on social media and had been comparing her pregnant body to her own. She couldn't stop thinking that I had done all these things before with someone else, and she felt like she was competing with a past that she could never win against. Even when I tried to bond with her and the baby, she would think about how I had already done this with Leah. It was eating her up inside. She admitted that she feared our new baby wouldn't be equal to Leah in my eyes. When I asked her about what she thought our baby would be like, she worried endlessly. What if the baby was disabled, or didn't like the things we enjoyed as a family? What if Leah and the baby didn't get along? She said there were moments when she even found herself wishing Leah had never been born, because then she wouldn't feel so threatened by the past. She hated that feeling and knew she had to put in extra effort to maintain a relationship with Leah. But the fear was always there that Leah would come first and the baby would never measure up. My wife even told me that one of her biggest fears was that I wouldn't bond with our new baby. She had read articles where fathers didn't feel connected to their children until they were older and capable of doing things as a family. She worried that I would be so wrapped up in work and Leah that our baby would be left out, a burden rather than a joy. She had seen videos and read stories of men who cared less with each new child, and it scared her to death. She was terrified that I wouldn't see our baby as special because the experience wasn't new for me anymore. Her concerns about coming between me and Leah ran deeper than I had realized. She admitted that when we were at the zoo, on the way to the hospital, she had cried. Not just because of the physical pain, but because she felt like she was ruining Leah's day, and that I would be upset for missing our planned activities with her. She told me how much she missed our usual outdoor activities, like biking, because of her pregnancy, and how Leah had complained to her about not getting to ride her new bike as often. She felt torn, trying to keep Leah happy while also dealing with the limitations of pregnancy. One of the hardest things for her to share was an incident that had happened when I wasn't home. A few months ago, my wife had suggested that we read stories together as a family. She had picked out her favorite childhood story for me to read to the baby and Leah, hoping it would help bond us all. But the next day, while I was at work, Leah ripped the pages out of that book. My wife had been devastated, and when she confided in her friend about it, that same friend suggested that I wouldn't believe her if she told me, and that I would think she was trying to come between me and Leah. Hearing all of this broke my heart. I never realized how deep her insecurities ran or how much she was struggling with feeling second place. I told her that I didn't care about how many children I had or who came first. Each of them was important, and being a father was something I cherished more than anything. I told her that this baby, our baby, was no less special to me than Leah was. I tried to reassure her that I wasn't going to compare them, that I loved her and our unborn child just as much as I loved Leah. But it was clear to me that she had been carrying these fears for a long time, and it was going to take more than words to heal the rift between us. Now, I feel like we're on shaky ground. But at least the conversation has started. We're slowly trying to rebuild, to reconnect. I've promised her that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere, and that our family, all of it, means everything to me. But I know we have a long way to go. I just hope that together, we can make it through this and become stronger on the other side. As we sat down one evening, I finally asked my wife the question that had been on my mind for so long. Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling? She hesitated at first, then opened up, her voice shaky with emotion. She explained that her thoughts didn't even make sense to her at the time. She wanted me to spend time with Leah, our daughter from my previous relationship, because she didn't want to feel left out or jealous. But when I did, she felt upset that I wasn't spending more time with her. It was an emotional tug-of-war inside her, one that she couldn't figure out herself. She loves Leah, truly, but part of her wishes that we could have experienced our first child together. Every time I gave Leah or our unborn baby attention, she felt torn. She was battling feelings of guilt, fearing that I'd think she was trying to come between Leah and me. When I began noticing the shift in her behavior and asked if she needed therapy, she said she was already deep in her struggle. She'd realized she wasn't acting like herself but couldn't admit it. In a way, she doubled down, knowing she had already created distance between us. Her biggest regret was pushing me away and not allowing me to help her. She confessed that she felt like her first pregnancy was tainted by her actions. And it was something she couldn't undo. Hearing her words made me realize just how much I had failed her. I apologized for not being there in the way she needed me to be. She said she had done her own research on the internet, reading forums where people were criticized harshly for feeling resentful toward their stepchildren. She feared I'd see her the same way. She also admitted that if I had told her I felt similarly about Leah, it would have made her angry. So, she couldn't imagine how I wouldn't be upset with her. We sat there, crying together for what felt like hours. I tried to comfort her, telling her how much I loved her, how excited I was for the future. I reminded her that she was my soulmate, that she was the family I chose, and that our being together was no accident. I told her that the universe brought us together because Leah and I needed her, and I still believe that. She apologized for pushing me away and promised to make things right. She admitted she had been on the verge of apologizing when I had my meltdown, but my yelling had shocked her. She realized in that moment that she might have hurt me beyond repair. But we continued to cry and talk, releasing months of tension. Then she asked me something that made my heart swell. Do you want to feel the baby? Of course. I said yes, and we cried even more, this time out of relief and joy. That night, I cooked dinner, and we laughed about how overwhelmed I had been, even going so far as to seek advice from Reddit. She wanted to read my post, and when she did, she cried again. But this time, it was a cathartic release. Reading the comments from other women who had felt similarly made her feel less alone, less monstrous. Things were awkward at first, after so many months of tension between us. We tiptoed around each other, unsure of how to get back to where we were. But slowly, things began to change. I knew things were getting better when one Saturday morning she woke me up by whispering, "The baby wants blueberry pancakes." I can't remember the last time I made pancakes that quickly, but I do remember the huge smile on my face. A few days later, we went to a pool party together. This was another big moment because she let me choose her swimsuit, something she hadn't done in a long time, as she had been self-conscious and had been wearing baggy clothes around me. We even took family pictures. On the way home, she asked me to feel her belly, and for the first time, I felt our baby hiccup. It was a moment we could share together, something new that was ours alone. From then on, she started letting me help her more. When she was feeling sick, She stopped making excuses about Leah needing me and started leaning on me instead. One of the sweetest moments was when I learned her new little signal. When she comes to me, turns her back, and lifts her arm, that's my cue to lift her belly to give her some relief. I've been spending so much time rubbing her belly, talking to it, and rubbing her feet, legs, back, shoulders, pretty much every part of her body because, at this point, she's sore everywhere. I never imagined that being asked to go out at 2 a.m. to find some random food would bring me so much happiness, but it does. And while I regret missing out on so much during the earlier months of her pregnancy, I'm grateful for the connection we're building now. My wife has gotten emotional a few times, admitting how much better she feels now that she's opened up. She wishes she had talked to me sooner because she can see how much easier things could have been. I've been working hard to ease some of her guilt, too. For instance, I went to a local bike shop and bought a pull-behind trailer so we could go on family bike rides. Now, I pull her along with a small fan and ice packs to keep her cool, while Leah rides beside us. I've also taken some time off work to be with them more, which has made a huge difference for all of us. We're all in therapy now, and Leah's therapist has reassured us that she's securely attached to both of us. She's coping well, enjoying the time we spend together, and she's incredibly excited to be a big sister. My wife had been terrified that Leah could sense the shift in her attitude, but the therapist said Leah only has one complaint: my wife forgot her candy once, and it took the store 32 whole minutes to deliver it. We're getting closer and closer to welcoming our baby into the world, and we're doing everything we can to prepare. There are still moments when my wife needs reassurance. Sometimes she brings up my ex, wondering about my past, and I've learned that the best way to handle those moments is to steer the conversation toward our firsts: our first house, our first vacation, our first kiss, our first date. I remind her of all the moments that made me fall more in love with her and how happy she makes me. I remind her of the times when she and Leah have made me feel like the luckiest man alive. It breaks my heart that my wife struggled in silence for so long. But I've learned that saying these things out loud takes away a lot of their power. I think most people know how bad it feels when your mind is flooded with thoughts that don't even feel like your own. I should have seen her struggle sooner. I should have fought harder for our relationship and her mental health instead of accepting the distance between us. But now, we're healing. We're growing. And I hope that by sharing this, we can help someone else who might be struggling with similar feelings. My wife gave me permission to share this story because she wants others to know they're not alone. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's story, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Red Relationships to never miss a future upload.